From healthcare to trade policies, the pandemic response to racial justice, voters in Michigan's 8th Congressional District have a lot to consider in one of the state's most competitive races. This morning, both candidates are here live. Democrat Alyssa Slotkin and Republican Paul Young. Today is Sunday, September 27, 2020, and this is Flashpoint. Hi, and welcome to Flashpoint. I'm so glad you're with us, and I am just as grateful to my two guests this morning, the two candidates vying to represent Michigan's 8th Congressional District in Congress. I am delighted to have with me today the incumbent Congresswoman Alyssa Slotkin and the Republican challenger, Paul Young. Thank you both. I'm so glad you're here. Let me say at the outset that we have not only spread ourselves apart here at the desk, but yesterday all three of us, I'm happy to say, tested negative for COVID-19 because I just didn't see an effective way really to have the two of you talk about these issues that are so critical over a Zoom conversation. My aim is more that we have a conversation than a classic debate. And so there's no, as you both know, no 30-second rebuttals, no time cues or time warnings, and I'll just be doing everything I can to make sure that you both get a fair shot at this huge array of matters, of course, that are facing American voters as we head toward Election Day. I do want to start with the pandemic, but before we do that, let's warm up a little bit with helping me understand why you're both here. It is a very poisonous time in American politics. Horrible things are being said about both of you, as you probably have seen on social media. You're both spending an outrageous amount of money and time and energy to be a part of an institution that so many Americans right now hold in very low regard. In fact, Paul, you left television news for the one American institution that people hold in lower regard. Let me start with you as the challenger. Why do you want to do this? Why do you want to be a part of this?
Well, I mean, I've always been interested in public policy and serving people, whether it's in television, whether it's as a prosecutor, where I worked in a domestic violence unit to protect battered women and abused children. And really, when I was looking around the district back last summer and fall, so many people said, hey, Congresswoman Slotkin said she was going to be independent, said she was going to focus on our issues, wouldn't pursue impeachment. And instead, she's been very partisan. And so I decided to throw my hat in the ring because I think the voters of the 8th District deserve someone that will focus on their problems instead of the normal D.C. politics.
And Congresswoman, now that you've been through 2 years of seeing the kind of vitriol that exists in American political life, did you give any thought to not doing this again?
No, it's been the greatest honor and privilege of my life to serve this district. I had a national security background when I came into this, but what really got me into it was my mom and her experience of having a pre-existing condition and struggling to get health care because of the way she was being gouged. That motivated me to run, and we still have a lot of fight, especially now, on the issue of protecting people with pre-existing conditions.
Well, I did want to start with coronavirus, and that is going to be intricately wrapped up in healthcare as well. And let me start with you, with the grade that you would give the American government for this pandemic, understanding that you are partly complicit in it as a member of that government. It looks disastrous, doesn't it?
Well, I think certainly someone who was working for the federal government for 15 years, I think we got a really slow start from the federal government. And what it did was pit states against each other to get things like masks and gloves and just basic supplies. I'd say it's probably around a C+. I think we came into it slow, but increased and improved. For me, it set me off on this obsession of making more of those medical supplies, pharmaceuticals here in the United States, in Michigan. We just had a bipartisan bill pass last week on that. I wrote it back in May because of the way we were walloped here in Michigan and had none of those supplies when we needed them from the national stockpile.
We lead the world in deaths to this. As we consider ourselves the most modern nation, advanced nation on the planet. What does an F look like if it's a C+?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think we see it variable across the country, right? Some areas took it very seriously, some areas didn't. But from the federal government, I mean, that is the response, right? The fundamental role of government is to keep people safe. And I think the federal government really fell down on the job very early, and we're trying to sort of build our way back up.
What have you seen, Paul? How would you characterize the American response?
Well, it's uneven, I think, and we can see that not just in, you point out that it's America has the most deaths, but I think that's only if you trust the information that you're getting out of China, that you're getting out of Iran. I don't think you can trust that information. When you look at the number of deaths per 100,000 or per million, America is comparable to many other countries in the world. So to say that we've been especially bad in our response, I think is unfair. And it's interesting, too, to look at what happens with different states. I mean, the worst states have been New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, where the death rate is something I think like 170, 177. Michigan, unfortunately, ranks in the top 10 of that response, whereas other states have been much better. So, but I'm running for Congress, and so I think part of our focus should be what would a member of Congress done? And I think here's another example of Congresswoman Slotkin pursuing a partisan agenda instead of focusing on ways that can get relief. And I'm talking specifically about the $3 trillion HEROES Act. There were over a dozen Democrats that opposed that bill because it had all kinds of problems. Free money for illegal immigrants, get out of jail free cards, tax breaks for the wealthy. And there were not just Paul Young saying that, but those Democrats that opposed the bill said this is Washington politics at its worst. They said that this will delay coronavirus relief. And so not just, what did President Trump do or what did Governor Whitmer do, but the U.S. Congress really should have done better and has delayed coronavirus relief now for over 4 months.
You want to respond to that?
Sure. I think we've seen Mr. Young over and over and over again not talk about what he wants to positively and affirmatively do for people's lives, but just criticize and criticize. And I have to say, with misleading information. I've literally been named as one of the most bipartisan members of Congress. I worked for 2 different presidents, Democrat and Republican, and last week passed bipartisan legislation that we built to be 9 Democrats, 9 Republicans. So this idea that he keeps repeating of partisanship, our own Detroit Free Press this past week, which he calls fake news, said that he was misleading and cherry-picking information. He keeps repeating it because he has no affirmative agenda. He has no way to describe what he's going to do to fight for people, particularly people like my mom, who had a pre-existing condition, who were gouged their entire lives, and now that issue is going to be in front of the Supreme Court on November 10th. It couldn't be more important for a member of Congress, as he repeats over and over again, to be clear about what they're going to fight for. And I've been running for a year against, Mr. Young's been running for a year, and I still don't know what his health care policy is. So I
want us to get to that. You have been very critical of the times that you've seen Alyssa Slotkin side with Nancy Pelosi. I'm curious, is that to suggest that you would not side often with Kevin McCarthy or your Republican colleagues?
No, I think the voters can absolutely expect that as a Republican running, and I'm putting out policies that are consistent with Republican leadership, that yes, of course I will. The key difference here is that Congresswoman Slotkin presented herself as somehow uniquely independent or bipartisan, and she just simply isn't. And I'd like to address that charge that we're cherry picking here. She does vote 96% of the time with Nancy Pelosi. But if you don't like that measurement, how about final passage of bills? On that measure, Alyssa Slotkin is 100% of the time with the majority of her party. If you don't like that measure, how about how often does she vote with the Democratic Majority Leader, Steny Hoyer? That's 94%.
Let me interrupt you quickly. Final passage of bills, bills that pass Congress only get through with bipartisan support. Does it really matter then where your vote is on bills that pass?
Well, thank you for that clarification. I'm talking about bills that pass the House of Representatives, because that's another excellent example of kind of the misleading way that the Congresswoman presents information. Let's talk about drug pricing. She talks about having passed legislation that would reduce the cost of prescription drugs. What she doesn't tell you is that didn't become law, because instead of working with Republicans in the Senate and even potentially the White House, she just has a campaign document that does nothing to reduce drug prices, doesn't help anyone in the 8th District.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, because if you looked, then that prescription drug bill, that very bill that we're talking about, was deeply bipartisan. It was passed unanimously by voice vote through the House of Representatives, because when I build a bill, I start with this idea that it has to be bipartisan to pass government. So add it to the over 600 bills that Senator McConnell has left on his desk that are bipartisan, that could go in front of the Congress or in front of the Senate tomorrow. But in terms of bipartisanship, he'll throw out a lot of different facts. The Detroit Free Press is clearly not good enough for him as pushing back on it. But let's look at what the Detroit Chamber of Commerce just said last week. They just endorsed me in addition to the Lansing Chamber. Mr. Young worked for the Chamber of Congress repeatedly, and they still came out and endorsed me and named in their endorsement my bipartisanship.
He mentioned the impeachment vote. Let me quickly ask you if you believe that that's in line with where your constituents are in the 8th District. Do you have any second thoughts about that vote now?
I don't have second thoughts. I certainly knew it was going to be controversial. I can't think of something I wanted to work on less than impeachment in my first term in Congress, representing the district that I do. But there has to be something more important than just voting to keep yourself in office. So I went into that with knowing that it could end my career, and the voters are going to have a choice in November. They're going to have an opportunity to exercise that vote. But I still believe that even if people don't agree with me, they want leaders who have integrity, and I risk my job to take that vote.
Paul, I mentioned at the beginning the poisonous culture that we have right now. I think a lot of that I think a lot of Americans are fed up with what they feel is overt partisanship.
For sure.
You seem to be speaking about more partisanship, that you want someone who is more aligned with Republican thought, and you seem to take a dim view of bipartisan thinking right now.
Well,
How often would I expect you to align yourself with Democrats to solve problems if you're in Washington?
You know, it's hard to measure that, of course, because I don't know what bills will be before the next Congress should I be elected. But I would disagree. It's less, what I'm trying to get to is what's the truth? What is the reality of what's going on? And the reality is that when it comes to final passage of bills, 100% of the time the Congresswoman is with her party. There are so many instances. Take the HEROES Act. That was an act that was the fourth take on providing coronavirus relief for people. There were 14 Democrats that voted against that bill, and they said this is Washington politics as usual. It has provisions that have nothing to do with the coronavirus, and it will delay the coronavirus. So instead of joining 14 colleagues and saying, no, we need a more responsible bill, she was just with party leadership. And that's just about bringing out the truth.
It's like he's not watching what happens on a daily basis. A couple of weeks, literally a week and a half ago at this point, 25 Democrats, 25 Republicans, me being one of those people, came out and said enough of not having negotiations on the next COVID bill. We've come up with a framework, a compromise that is the basis of negotiations, or should be. We put that out there. My leadership, Nancy Pelosi, was not happy about it. Senator McConnell was not happy about it. She said she didn't want to take it up. And now what do we have? She's been pressured by people like me and my Republican colleagues, and we're bringing a vote to the floor next week on the next COVID bill. So I know that he has his talking points. He's got great training as a news anchor, which I know is important, but it's not about, I know, but being a representative in all seriousness is about digging into the details and doing what's right for your constituents and talking about how you're going to help their pocketbooks and their kids. And he can't offer that because he's an inch deep and mile wide.
Let me ask you both, because we have the tendency when we see a congressional race to nationalize it. Tip O'Neill reminded us all politics is local. As you've traveled around the 8th District, what is the single most important issue to the constituents that you've talked to?
Well, you know, certainly before the coronavirus, I think people talked about the importance of maintaining an economy that was just firing on all cylinders. We had record low unemployment. We had wages that were rising, especially at the lower end of the spectrum. And with the government shutdowns that have caused unemployment to spike and caused people to have economic concerns, that absolutely remains a top priority. But it's also, I think, if I were to rank them, I'd say addressing the coronavirus is probably the top priority when I'm out talking to people. We have got to defeat the coronavirus. And that involves a lot of issues that we have to work on. We have to increase testing, not just that the three of us were able to get to be here today, but testing for everyone, because we want to lean forward into being able to safely get our kids back to school, safely getting back to work. So it's defeating the coronavirus. It's accelerating research into a vaccine and finding other treatments. I think that's probably the top priority for most voters.
Do you feel out of step at all with President Trump on the coronavirus then?
No, I don't think so. I mean, you know, the president took actions that absolutely saved lives. When he, in January, said we need to stop travel from China, he was mocked by most leading Democrats, and I think that helped to save lives. You know, as Congresswoman Slotkin herself said, I think it's been uneven, and it's been imperfect by Governor Whitmer, it's been imperfect by the president. When you have a new global pandemic, that's to be expected, I think. So, but as we get more into it, as we get to know more about it, you know, I give the president credit for having accelerated a vaccine and other measures.
The number one issue for constituents that you believe this time around?
Certainly the public health and economic issues around the COVID virus and how we're going to recover. But before then, I literally could not get through a grocery store without someone coming up to me and clutching my hands and talking about the price of healthcare and the price of prescription drugs. These are real people who are paying more in their mortgage more in insulin costs than they are in their mortgage. They have insurance, they've done everything right. That was the issue, particularly given my experience with my mom, where people would just feel the need to tell me their pain. And that's the issue that I think is our generation's problem to solve.
Well, you're both taking me perfectly then into healthcare. We're going to get to that in just a minute. I need to take a quick break because it would appear that healthcare is going to be one of the main issues now as we move toward a new Supreme Court appointment in Washington. Stay with us. We'll continue with more in just a moment. This is Flashpoint on Local 4.
Designer brands priced for immediate liquidation now at Gorman's 3-day clearance center. Up to 70% off quality furnishings direct from our Hall Road store closing sale. Plenty of world-famous Stickley. Gorman's 3-day clearance center.
At Beaumont, we're always ready for change. So when COVID-19 changed the way our community needed us, we created change to serve them even better. Change that made safer return-to-work programs with on-site screenings possible. Change that let us pivot quickly and care for the most COVID-19 patients in all of Michigan. Because the one thing that will never change is our commitment to you.
You're all set to retire. You have your home paid off, money in the bank, and sound investments. But if you're not careful, all the things that you work so hard for can disappear. At Semasco Financial, we'll help you prevent that. We go beyond ordinary asset management. We'll safeguard everything that you have by creating a plan made specifically for you. How much can you afford to lose? Nothing. Protect the people that you love and the things that you have. Call Semasco Financial today.
Save 50% off all Lexington furnishings at Gorman's. Pure style has never been more affordable. Gorman's is offering factory direct savings of 50% off the unequal styling of Lexington this weekend at Gorman's.
Welcome back to this morning's conversation with Congresswoman Alyssa Slotkin and challenger Paul Young, both vying to represent Michigan's 8th Congressional District. Let's move to health care if we could. Paul, you have said that you don't really have any interest in seeing the Affordable Care Act overturned.
That's right.
Does that change the way you think then now about the president's appointment to the Supreme Court? Because this very much could be about overturning the Affordable Care Act.
You know, I'm not going to prejudge what any nominee to the Supreme Court might judge on an issue. I mean, the job of Supreme Court justices is to review the law dispassionately, and from what I've seen of the background of this nominee, I expect she would do that. And, you know, look, if there is a judgment that the Affordable Care Act or any act is found to be unconstitutional, I'm not sure why any member of Congress or any citizen would say, hey, let's try to enforce and maintain a law that's been found to be unconstitutional.
You've also, though, talked about trying to support and continue a system of employer-provided health care in America. I think a lot of millennials would say, man, what are you watching? The gig economy, people who are moving from freelance job to freelance job, and a lot of employers no longer offering health care benefits, that's just out of step with reality.
Well, sure. I mean, I think anecdotally, people can find an example for anything they want, but the numbers are what the numbers are. I mean, about 110 or 120 million people get their health insurance through employer-provided programs, and they, by and large, they like those programs. Medicare and Medicaid are part of the solution as well. I mean, look, as the economy evolves, if we have to find new solutions to new employment models, then we'll absolutely have to do that.
Healthcare to you should look like what? You have rejected the idea that we should have a single universal care system. You'd like a public option. Yep. I think a lot of people to the left of you would say you just want to stay a little pregnant here. That to make healthcare finally be more efficient in America, you do need one public system. You're not willing to do that.
No, and I've also never seen an actual plan with numbers behind it that explains how we're going to pay for it. It explains what happens to all those folks who work in the healthcare industry, who work in the insurance world, and all the folks who do like their employer-provided insurance.
Then that's what I was going to say. Yeah. I think a lot of people wonder how it is that we remain attached to where your healthcare is only as good as the job that you have. Yeah. Does that make sense?
No, I don't think it makes sense. I can't tell you how many people are stuck in dead-end jobs because their healthcare is tied to that job, and they've got a child who's sick. They've got some reason why they're staying there. There is a ton of people who work outside the normal system who, like you said, in the gig economy are contractors and subcontractors, people who work independently, who need healthcare coverage. There are young people who maybe haven't gotten that first job, but we know want to have their own health insurance after they turn 26. Those folks should have a reliable, affordable option.
Paul, you both have spent a lot of time talking about protecting people who have pre-existing conditions. The president talks about it a lot, but there's a reason why Republicans haven't come up with a comprehensive health care plan in the 10 years that they've had to provide one. And one of those reasons is that while people say that they want to protect people who have pre-existing conditions, Obamacare seemed to suggest the only way that you can do that is by having everybody in the system. It's the only way to amortize that cost. Do you see another way of providing care or coverage for people with pre-existing conditions than that?
I absolutely do, and it's interesting. The Congresswoman talks about the example, and she says that part of the reason that the insurance coverage lapsed in the instance that with her mother is because the premiums were so high. So part of the solution into making sure that people can maintain their insurance coverage is to do everything we can to keep premiums low, and that means doing things like not putting undue burdens and regulations that require certain type of coverage that someone might not want. It's allowing insurance companies to provide coverage across state lines. We need to do the things to keep those premiums in check so that people aren't put in a position where coverage lapses.
With all due respect, if you're going to talk about my mother's case, then you shouldn't talk about it without knowing anything about it. My mother's case wasn't that she couldn't afford insurance because of undue regulation. It's because she had a pre-existing cancer that she had had 30 years ago, and that forever and ever and ever, every insurance company felt they could gouge her and charge her $1,000 a month and a $10,000 deductible. Please don't speak about my mother as if you understand what made her health care unaffordable to her. And I think it's crazy that every time we ask you specific details about the thing that really helps people know that they're going to be protected, their kids are going to be protected, you deflect and start attacking me and raising my mother. Come on, Paul. Like, this is about being a big guy and running for Congress. If you're going to do it right and tell people that how you're going to protect them, and not some throwaway talking point, but a real plan.
Well, Congresswoman, thank you for that opportunity. And listen, I didn't bring up your mother's health care. I think everyone appreciates that you loved your mother and that you were sorry to see the challenges that she faced. And I in no way am disparaging that. What I'm addressing is that the problem of people who let their coverage lapse often has to do with the affordability of health care. And so I'm trying to talk about how we can address that issue, not just for people in your family, but for people in families across the 8th District.
We're going to run out of time here before I can get to everything. I want to move to trade, if we could. Congresswoman, if I was picked up out of 2005 and dropped in 2020, I wouldn't know where I am on the way that the trade argument has now developed, where we have a Republican administration pushing protectionist tariff measures that Democrats begged for years. Democrats were upset with NAFTA.
Yeah.
We've renegotiated that now. Does the president not deserve credit from Democrats for taking on the trade fight that they for years asked him to do?
Sure. The sentiment behind his trade fight, absolutely. I don't think there's a person out there who can tell you that China isn't cheating in the international system and that they needed some major pushback. I just think that some of the tariffs that he put on here in the United States against our major industries and our major farmers were making the cure worse than the disease. I supported the president on NAFTA. I approved and I voted in favor of his signature trade accomplishment, and a lot of Democrats in this state did not support it. So I think it's a mixed bag, but the actual things he's put in place have ended up being more painful for our industries than the original problem of China cheating.
Conversely, Paul, are you comfortable as an avowed conservative with protectionist trade and tariffs?
I am not comfortable with protectionist trade. I absolutely believe in free markets and free trade, and I think the president does as well. I mean, the president didn't abolish trade between Mexico and Canada. He improved it by putting America first. The president hasn't abolished trade with China. He has recognized that they cheat on these things, that they're stealing intellectual property, and that they make this country vulnerable when we allow prescription drugs to be almost so expansively produced just in China, the production of protective equipment to be produced so expansively in China. The president deserves a lot of credit for highlighting that issue. And even though, look, tariffs are not the end-all tool that you want, but when it helps you as a negotiating measure to get better deals for America, I absolutely support that.
Our role in the world was the subject of an interesting, and our reputation in the world, subject of a really interesting piece in the Boston Globe yesterday, where a lot of people from around the world talked about what they were seeing in America in terms that I don't think any of us would be comfortable hearing someone from Myanmar talk about the problems that America is facing. The mayor of Sarnia, Ontario, Mike Bradley, was quoted as saying, "This is like watching the decline of the Roman Empire." Just your thoughts on the way that the United States is now perceived around the world and the role that we're supposed to play in being a world leader.
Well, obviously with my national security background, this one, it really hits home for me. The president has just taken this approach of sticking his finger in the chest of our allies and cozying up to our adversaries. And I think the most important thing that is just we've lost is this idea that the Americans have a principled approach to foreign policy and have a principled approach to democracy that was supposed to be the beacon for the rest of the world. And now people look at us and say, I can't use you as my example of how leadership should look. The American handshake has to mean something. We have to be in that leadership role, I believe, for a safer and better world. And the president, by any measure, has, I believe, made us less safe because of the way he's stressed those allied relationships.
I couldn't disagree with that more. I mean, look at what's happening in the neighborhood where China is. We see allies, Australia, Japan, South Korea, Vietnam flocking to be closer to America because they see the threat that's coming from China and they see strong American leadership. Look in the Middle East. The Congresswoman talks about not handling threats. She was aware that there was an Iranian general named Soleimani who she had been in meetings with, and they knew that he had been killing hundreds of people, taking the limbs from American veterans, well, now veterans. She criticized the president when he ordered that strike that killed Soleimani. And look at the effects of that. For the first time now, we have two Arab countries besides Jordan and Egypt that have normalized relations with Israel. So I think this idea that Americans are less safe or not respected in the world is simply not true.
With all due respect, I think there's one of us who actually has a background on this stuff. The attacks against U.S. forces in Iraq are higher than when we killed Qasem Soleimani. We've had problems and are putting more mechanized units in places like Syria. So this idea that somehow we're more safe because of that, I question. Now, do I think that it's right that on issues of war and peace, we have a constitutional conversation between the president and the U.S. Congress? Maybe it's because I'm married to a 30-year Army veteran and my kid is in the military right now. Yes, I think that those are conversations we should be having at a serious level if you're going to either intentionally or accidentally lead us to war.
Only got about 30 seconds left if you want to tackle that.
Well, I guess I would just say I'm going to reject the idea that only someone that has served as a CIA analyst is permitted to weigh in on these important issues. Where there was a threat to American life, the president acted. When Congresswoman Slotkin saw that threat, she chose not to act.
I'm afraid we're out of time, and there's only about a dozen or so more topics on my card. I'm so grateful that you were both here. Really appreciate it. Congresswoman Melissa Slotkin, Challenger Paul Young, good luck to both of you as you head down the campaign trail. The next big debate, by the way, on the calendar will come Tuesday night. President Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden facing off in Cleveland. You'll see it live here on Local 4. And our Grant Herms will have the Trust Index for you at 11 o'clock right after. Thanks so much for being here. Meet the Press is next. Have a great week. See you next time on Flashpoint.